If you are listening while trying to hold a lot together quietly, this episode is for you. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're growing in a season that requires a different pace. Today, we're talking about how to practice grace when effort alone is not enough. Welcome back to the Next Level You podcast, where we help you build the bridge between your now and your next. In part one, we explored grace as a discipline, a leadership skill, and a way to stay human as we grow. But many people don't struggle with understanding grace. They struggle with trusting it, especially when life feels constrained, when energy and time are limited, when capacity doesn't match ambition.
This episode is about practicing grace in those moments where there's no perfect choice, only trade-offs. This is about how grace shows up when you cannot do it all and you still want to keep moving forward. If you have been telling yourself that you just need to try a little harder, push longer, or get back to who you used to be, stay with us. This episode will give you a different way to lead yourself when effort alone is not enough. This is an episode you do not need to power through. Just let it meet you where you are.
When energy is limited, grace starts with accurate self-assessment, not motivation. Many high performers misinterpret low energy as a mindset problem, but in reality, low energy is often a physiological signal, not a character flaw. Practicing grace here looks like recognizing fatigue as information, not failure. Scaling effort without abandoning intention. And choosing regulation before resolution. If even one of these feels relevant, that's enough. If this conversation feels personal, that's because it is. Many people carry exhaustion silently and then judge themselves for it.
Research from the World Health Organization defines burnout as a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by chronic workplace stress that is not effectively managed. This framing matters because it removes morality from exhaustion. Grace in low energy moments asks, what is the most aligned action I can take with the energy I have? This might mean resting instead of pushing, completing one task instead of 5, pausing before decision making. Grace does not mean disengaging. It means adjusting effort to reality.
When time is limited, grace helps you move from urgency to discernment. Without grace, limited time creates rushed decisions, self-criticism, overextension, and anxiety-driven productivity. Practicing grace here looks like accepting trade-offs without self-punishment, letting go of completion in favor of clarity, and separating what matters from what pressures.
Research from the American Psychological Association shows that time pressure increases cognitive load, which reduces decision quality and emotional regulation. Grace interrupts the belief that if I do not do everything now, I'm failing. Instead, grace asks, what actually needs my attention today? What can be deferred without harm? What would tomorrow benefit from me preserving now? Grace allows you to leave things unfinished without carrying guilt forward.
There are moments when grace shows up quietly in the body. Moments when you are not unmotivated or disengaged, but physically you are depleted. There have been times when I recognized that my body needed rest late in the afternoon. And the moment I laid down, guilt followed. There were still things to get done. There was concern about how resting late in the afternoon might affect how I slept for the night. And there was an internal debate about whether stopping was responsible.
This is where grace gets tested, because this is not a question of knowing what is healthy. It's a question of trusting yourself enough to honor it. That guilt often comes from deeply rooted beliefs that rest must be earned, that stopping requires justification, that productivity determines worth.
Grace in that moment for me was not about ignoring responsibility. It was about telling the truth without turning it into a personal failure. I'm tired. My body is asking for rest. Rest now may support me later. Grace didn't remove the tension. It simply allowed me to make a choice without punishing myself for it. That's what grace looks like in the body. Listening without shaming and responding without spiraling. Before we go further, take a breath with us, because what we are about to talk about is one of the most common places people lose trust with themselves.
If you have ever wondered why something that used to feel manageable now feels heavy, this part is for you. Nothing has gone wrong. You may simply be in a different season. This is one of the most emotionally charged places where grace is required. Ambition often stays constant even when capacity changes. Without grace, this mismatch becomes self-attack. Why can't I keep up? Why am I struggling with things I used to handle? Why does it feel harder than it should? Practicing grace here looks like accepting seasons of constraint without redefining your identity, decoupling worth from output, letting ambition inform direction, not pace.
Research on self-regulation and performance from the Harvard Business School highlights that sustainable high performance depends on cycles of stress and recovery, not constant output. Grace allows you to say, my ambition is still valid, my capacity is temporarily limited, and both can be true without canceling each other out. This is where grace protects long-term growth.
Grace does not always feel relieving. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable because grace forces you to accept limits. Choosing rest often means letting tasks wait, accepting that the day will not unfold as ideally as hoped, releasing an image of how productive you thought you should be. Without grace, guilt fills that space. Guilt says you should be able to push through. Grace says pushing through has a cost. Grace does not deny responsibility. It weighs responsibility against sustainability.
Grace becomes more complex when it touches identity. There have been moments when I reflected on how often I don't participate in evening or weekend social activities. And it's not because I don't value connection, and it's not because I don't care about relationships. It's because I'm exhausted. And that realization is frustrating for me at times, because part of me wants a full life, work, friendships, community, growth, rest. But the truth is, I can't hold all of that at the same intensity in every season. So grace here is not just about rest. It's about identity. Who am I if I can't show up everywhere? What does this say about my priorities? And what does this say about my capacity?
This is where people often turn grace into self-criticism. They assume something must be wrong with them. Grace asks a different question. What season am I in? What is being asked of me right now? What does my body and my nervous system need to stay well?
Grace allowed me to acknowledge disappointment without self-attack. I can want connection and still choose rest. I can grieve what I cannot do without betraying what I need. That's not a weakness. That's discernment.
If you are listening and realizing how much you have been holding together quietly, we see you. There is often grief inside of grace. Grief for a version of yourself with more energy. Grief for a life you imagined. Grief for a balance that feels just out of reach. Grace does not rush past that grief. Grace allows you to say, "This is hard. This is not how I pictured it. I am still choosing what supports me." Avoidance denies grief. Grace allows grief without letting it define you.
Grace is especially necessary during grief. And grief isn't always obvious. Sometimes grief comes from the loss of a relationship, a role, a future you were expecting, a sense of closeness that changed, a chapter that ended without closure. One of the hardest things about grief is that it doesn't follow a timeline.
High performers often struggle with grief because they try to manage it like a task. They want to heal quickly, get back to normal, move on efficiently.
But grace in grief asks a different question. Not how do I get over this, but how do I stay with myself while I move through this? Grace allows you to say, this mattered to me, this loss is real, and I don't need to rush my healing to be worthy of moving forward.
There is often pressure to be okay, to appear strong, to perform resilience. Grace allows honesty instead. Honesty about sadness that still surfaces. Honesty about energy that fluctuates. Honesty about days that feel heavier than others. Healing is not linear. Grace reminds you that you are not regressing because something still hurts. You are human. Grace creates the safety that healing requires.
Grace is also required in professional spaces, especially when starting a new role or stepping into greater responsibility. There's often this internal pressure to perform quickly, to exceed expectations, to prove competence. But much of that pressure is self-imposed. I've experienced moments where I wanted to do everything, learn everything, and deliver everything immediately. Grace becomes necessary when you realize that expectation is unsustainable.
High performers often confuse commitment with overextension. They assume capability requires constant output. Grace at work looks like acknowledging that mastery takes time. It looks like stopping work at a reasonable hour, even when there's more you could do. It looks like saving certain tasks for the next day so you do not disrupt your work-life balance. That choice can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like falling short. Grace reframes the moment. Grace says sustainable performance matters more than short-term over-delivery.
Work-life balance is not theoretical. It's practiced moment by moment. When you choose not to send one more email, when you close your laptop without guilt, when you accept that tomorrow can hold what today cannot. Without grace, balance feels like failure. But with grace, balance becomes leadership. Grace allows you to pace yourself so you can remain clear, present, and effective.
Grace doesn't end with how you treat yourself. Grace also shapes how we respond to others. There are moments when people disappoint us. behave in ways we do not expect, respond in ways that feel careless or hurtful. In those moments, it's easy to assume intent. Grace asks us to pause.
We rarely have full visibility into someone else's life. They may be dealing with stress, loss, pressure, limited capacity. Now, grace doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it interrupts immediate judgment. Instead of concluding that they don't care, grace asks, what else might be true? Now, grace doesn't mean self-abandonment. Rather, it allows discernment. Is this a moment for understanding or a moment for a boundary? Grace governs the tone, not the outcome.
Grace also applies to interactions with people we do not know. The person who is short with you, the interaction that feels unnecessary or rude. Grace doesn't mean absorbing mistreatment. It means choosing not to carry it. Grace allows you to say, this moment does not define my day.
Before we close, we want to talk about why this matters. Grace is not just something you practice to feel better. Grace is something that you master so you can keep growing. Mastering grace doesn't mean eliminating discomfort. It means discomfort no longer controls how you lead yourself.
Your next level can look like many things. Resting without guilt, learning without rushing yourself, setting boundaries without self-abandonment, allowing healing without forcing timelines, showing up consistently instead of perfectly. Grace is what allows growth to continue when things feel heavy, unclear, or demanding.
Without grace, agility becomes instability. Belonging becomes self-abandonment. Confidence becomes overcompensation. Discipline becomes rigidity. Energy becomes depleted, and fear becomes avoidance. Grace is what keeps all of these working together instead of against you. When grace is mastered, your internal dialogue changes. You stop asking, why am I not handling this better? And you start asking, what does this season require from me? Grace shifts the question from self-judgment to self-leadership.
This is how grace moves you forward. It allows you to pause without losing momentum, to adjust without quitting, to carry grief without getting stuck, to stay present without burning out. Grace does not slow your progress, it stabilizes it.
At your next level, you will need more than effort. You will need regulation, discernment, capacity, and patience with yourself as you grow into new responsibilities. Grace is what allows you to move forward without breaking trust with yourself along the way.
And this is exactly why grace matters and how you use the next check-in. The framework is not meant to push you harder. It's meant to help you lead yourself better. Grace is the tone that keeps reflection from turning into judgment.
As you move through this check-in, let grace guide the way you listen to yourself. Notice, where are you pushing harder than you need to? Evaluate. What belief is driving that pressure? Experiment. What would it look like to respond with grace instead of judgment? And track. What changes when you pace yourself instead of pushing? Grace turns reflection into guidance.
Grace allows you to grow without hardening. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to pace yourself. Grace is how you keep building the bridge between your now and your next without losing yourself along the way. We will keep building this bridge together, one season and one letter at a time.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Next Level You podcast on platforms such as YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Audible, or Amazon Music. Check our show notes for details. And if you want to dive deeper into the concepts we covered in this episode, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn by searching Next Level You. That's NEXTLEVEL and the letter U. Look for our bridge logo, and we'll see you soon.